Hello and welcome to the Gaggle Challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle. So, Peter, the New York Times, the leading kind of liberal outlet of the Western world, has a very malevolent take on many things. And one of its most malevolent practices is to generate hatred against others. Sometimes these others can look after themselves. Trump can look after himself. But often the Times generates hatred towards people who can't look after themselves. And one such example is it generates hatred towards Russian athletes and Russian artists. And the recent occasion for this was a long profile that the New York Times has run of Elina Svitolina, who's a Ukrainian tennis player, very notorious for demanding that Russian tennis players be banned from international competition, and then insisting that she doesn't shake hands with her Russian competitors, which of course is a violation of sporting etiquette. In every sport, you're supposed to shake hands with your opponent.
Well, George, she is so fearful and so angry about the possibility of shaking hands with a Russian woman. Don't play. Don't go.
Exactly. But that
problem solved. Problem solved.
Problem solved. But typically, because at first the crowds responded to her refusal to shake hands in a very negative way, because that's it's a violation of the etiquette. But the tennis authorities caved and said, "Oh, you don't have to shake hands. So that's it. You're free not to shake hands." So typical of them. But anyway, I want to just show you how malignant the New York Times is through this profile that it's run. It's a very long article, so we just look through a few highlights. And here is the headline: how the war in Ukraine turned tennis into a battlefield. Again, it never turned tennis.
Wouldn't it be better to say how the New York Times turned tennis into a battlefield? Exactly. Wouldn't it be better to say
exactly how the New York it wouldn't have been a battlefield. We're talking about professional athletes who are only concerned with competing at a very high level. But the New York Times isn't interested in that. How can we turn this into a battlefield? How can we turn this into hating somebody? And it says, for Ukrainian players, as well as those from Russia and its allies, the unceasing conflict at home has bled into the game. Now they face off at the US Open. Again, when they suggested that the Russian athletes are in any way interested in doing politics during tennis competition, that's of course a lie. They're not. They on the contrary, they hate politics being dragged into it. But again, New York Times wants to suggest that the Russians want to bring politics into sport. And here we have says Russia's attack on Ukraine plunged professional tennis into a cold war of its own, one that has destroyed friendship and sown animosity and mistrust on and off the court. Tensions were especially high in Wimbledon 2022. The All England club barred players from Russia and from Belarus. But again, they made that choice. So you say tensions were high. The British, who are not a party to the conflict, made that choice of banning Russian players from taking part. So outrageous was the British conduct that they were reprimanded and fined by the international tennis authorities. And Wimbledon that year lost its points standing, so that whatever any competitors, however well they did, they wouldn't get any points in their international standing.
Well, George, we can just look at the first sentence. Russia's attack on Ukraine plunged professional tennis into a cold war of its own. Well, no, one group of people, one country has plunged it into a cold war. This is not being reciprocated. See, during the Cold War, the Soviet Union recognized the West as an adversary. Right. The West recognized the Soviet Union as an adversary.
Right.
have you heard of one Russian tennis player called the Ukrainians an adversary?
No.
I haven't.
No.
You follow this. I don't.
That's right. Never, not once have they ever said anything negative about any Ukrainian player. It just goes with one side. And then this year they were back, much to the displeasure of Elena Svitolina and other Ukrainian players who have made it their practice.
What's her standing? How
She's
high is she in the rank?
She's number 26. She's number 26 seed in this in the U.S. Open. And yeah, well, okay, we'll talk a little bit about that later on. So much to the displeasure of Svitolina and other Ukrainian players who have made it their practice not to shake hands with opponents from either country, a break with custom that has drawn the ire of some fans. Again, they said we don't want to shake hands with the Russians, and the Russian, in fact, and the Belarusian players, one of them was Sabalenka. She came to the net in order to shake hands with Svitolina. Svitolina swept past her, refusing to shake her hand, and the Twitter sphere attacked Sabalenka, the Belarusian. Well, she knew that Svitolina wasn't going to shake her hand, so what was she doing going to the net to shake hands with her? Imagine that. She knew she wasn't going to shake hands with her.
But that's the rule.
That's the rule, exactly. She already made clear she wasn't going to shake hands with you. So why did you come to the net in order to shake hands with her? So she was the one who was attacked. The victim gets attacked. What were you? You knew she wasn't going to shake your hand. And then the Russians and Belarusians were designated as neutral athletes. Tennis's governing bodies were not allowing them to compete under their national flags.
But if they're not representing Russia, what's the problem with shaking their hand?
A very good point. Very good point. But see, that's what they're trying to do here is to suggest that if you don't come out and condemn Putin and Russia, then you deserve all the barbs that you get, and you should basically be banned from competition. I mean, that's really as we read this, that's really the subtext of this, that the Russian players are under an obligation to distance themselves from their government. Otherwise, they're entitled to be banned from international.
But I thought you could be banned from sports if you take drugs, or you break the rules of the game,
right.
You bet against yourself in gambling. Right. Those are reasons to dismiss people from sports, right?
Right.
But have your thoughts now, or your DNA, or your place of origin can be a reason to disqualify you. Okay, I just want to make that clear. Okay.
That's right, exactly. So you kind of, it's okay to hate them, whose only crime, incidentally, is they're Russian. I mean, these competitors, they're young women or young men. Their only crime is they're, Russian or Belarusian. And then they say, well, okay, you have committed this crime. You can atone for this crime of being a Russian by condemning your government. But if you don't, then you are not atoned, and therefore you deserve punishment.
Well, what would happen if an American tennis player condemned the Biden administration for its fiasco in Ukraine? Would they be disqualified?
They would be disqualified.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're absolutely. It would be very, very quick. They would be immediately disqualified.
These are thought crimes, also.
Exactly,
okay.
These are thought crimes.
These are thought criminals. They're thought criminals.
That's right. No, it really is. So she won the French Open junior title at age 15 in 2010. Then she studied in Brussels, and then he said, and has lived. So she's lived in Western Europe since 2010, since the age of 15. So again, her connection with Ukraine, is pretty thin. I mean, basically, she grew up already outside of Ukraine. So again, she's this great Ukrainian nationalist, and then basically she's lived in Western Europe since the age of 15.
George, that athletes in Ukraine and other parts of Eastern Europe, they do train in the West because they're open to extortion, kidnapping, all this. Because if sponsorship money, then they're in target. Okay, so that's why. So I think this young lady at the age of 15 realized that she could have a payday, and it's probably better to have that payday in the West than in her own country of birth. Right. Sorry, but it's all very true.
Right. No, I agree. And then one paradox of the war is that many of the tennis players caught up in the conflict are expatriates. Medvedev has been based in France for years. Rublev relocated to Spain as a teenager. Sabalenka, the Belarusian star currently ranked second on the women's tour, makes her home in Florida. So already you're saying, well, this great, you're trying to whip up this hatred and this animus towards these players. They don't even live in their countries. I mean, they have very, very tenuous connections to their countries. And then says Svitolina had spoken Russian most of her life. It was the principal language in Odessa. Notice the Odessa with the one S. Now everybody has this mandate, what one S, and Kharkov. And Russian culture was a touchstone when she was growing up. While the war has shattered any feelings of kinship with Russia, Svitolina said that there was already a deep sense of estrangement, which she attributed to the country's annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the conflict it initiated in the Donbass region the same year. She noticed a shift in attitude in the abuse she received on social media when she competed in tournaments in Russia. So she competes in tournaments. This is already after Crimea. She competes in tournaments in Russia. And then all these nutcases start attacking her for competing in tournaments in Russia. The messages came not just from Russians, but also from Ukrainians who accused her of betrayal. Not just from Russians. I bet you there were no attacks on her from Russians. None. They were happy to see her competing in competitions in Russia. It was the Ukrainians.
Well, and also, George, many Ukrainians today, and maybe for good reason, fine, but certainly Western media wants to make create the sense of a huge distinction between Ukrainians and Russians. Russians see this young lady and they cheer for her because she's one of us.
That's right. Exactly. And particularly, as it's clear, she spoke Russian all her life. In other words, she didn't really know any Ukrainian. I mean,
Odessa? Okay. I mean, ask anyone that knows anything about Ukrainian history. Will say, yeah, it's a Russian city. It has always been a Russian city.
Of course it is. Yeah, it was founded by Catherine the Great. And as Svitolina learned more about the situation in Crimea and Donbass, she came to think it had indeed been a mistake to continue to play in Russia. I really regret going after 2014. But again, where is she learning about the situation? She's living in Brussels. So it's not Ukrainians, it's Westerners who are kind of egging her on and telling her how this is so terrible and awful going to Russia. But she had been obviously quite happy to compete in Russia.
Well, I really regret going after 2014. When did you really regret after 2014? In 2022?
Exactly.
Is that when you regretted it?
That's right.
Or were you regretting it in 2014? See, that's ambiguous. But I read that as you're just, there's pressure on you. Yep. Maybe you can make some bucks off it, and it makes you heightens your profile. But I really regret going after 2014. When? In 2020?
No, exactly. They deliberately leave that very vague, for obvious reasons. Because otherwise they probably say, yeah, she was quite happy to go year after year to play, didn't really care very much until, she came under pressure and it was made clear to her, hey, you want to have a big future here as a tennis star, you better get with the program. Before the war, Svitolina had been studying Ukrainian and she was now basically fluent. Yeah, right. When they say somebody's fluent, I was thinking of like Laura Ingraham, who claims that she's fluent in Russian, or she knows about 3 words. Madeleine Albright claims she was fluent in 15 languages. That's the easiest thing in the world to claim, is that you're fluent in languages nobody else knows.
If you're a native Russian language speaker, and you want to learn Ukrainian, I tell you, it's very simple how to do it. There are certain words that are spelled differently. There's a few exceptions grammatically, and then they have different words for different things. In the United States, in New York and in California, sometimes they have different words for the same thing. Okay. Right. So that's not even a litmus test for a foreign language.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
I say sovereignty. What do you say, George?
I say sovereignty.
No, you say sovereignty all the time.
Do I say sovereignty? Yeah, I suppose so. It's actually one of those words that I've never been entirely sure how to pronounce. So
but that, you're making ways.
Yep.
But that's making my point. Right. Okay. Right. Right. Making the claim that is a completely distinctive, different language, that's a hard one to sell. Right. There are differences. Okay. So I don't know what the New York Times is trying to do here. Okay?
Right. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely. And then nor was she alone in that regard. And so then she says, Russian, on the other hand, was a dead language to her. She was no longer willing to use it. New York Times, rub, rub, rub. Now, when somebody says something like that, you think, what a stupid person. I mean, to say Russian is a dead language to you, you're no longer willing to use it. I mean, you don't like the Russian government, you don't like Putin, fine. Why take it out on the Russian language? But the New York Times is very happy with this. I mean, anybody else, you'd say, what a stupid thing to say. I mean, to say you hate the Russian language because of Putin.
Well, I suppose somewhere in Ukraine or in the Ukraine literature studies, they would probably have the equivalent of Ukrainian language SAT. I wonder if she could pass it.
Yeah, no, that's right.
I won.
That's right. That's right.
I won.
Yeah. But I think, but as we've talked before, you've got these rabid Ukrainian nationalist academics here in the West and in Ukraine who actually do want to extirpate Russian literature. I mean, they hate Russian writers. I mean, it's not just because, oh, he's Russian, so I hate him. I mean, they actually think these are horrible, obnoxious people. Dostoevsky is a horrible, evil, obnoxious person. No one should study him. He shouldn't even be in the library shelves. I mean, actually,
how long is the Ukrainian literature syllabus, George?
Quite. That's right. And
a lot of Russian writers have enormous affection for a geographical place called Ukraine. Okay?
Yeah.
People that were there when most of that literature was being written, they weren't called Ukrainians; they were called peasants, like everybody else. Okay?
That's exactly. Nor was she alone in that regard. So many of my friends who spoke only Russian, she said, now speak only Ukrainian. Yeah, I'll bet. That is just simply not true. I mean, if they only spoke Russian, they speak Russian. I mean, that's what they do. I mean, you don't suddenly start switching languages. Well into your whatever 20s. Hard work suddenly switching languages. Anyway, Svitolina
switching languages.
Well, no, I know, but I mean, if you're used to speaking Russian, suddenly moving over to Ukrainian, I mean, that's not that easy to do. I mean, Zelensky, he always spoke Russian, and that took a bit of work for him suddenly to switch over to Ukrainian. Anyway,
but it wasn't such a leap. Okay,
no,
Russian and Ukrainian can sit down and talk in their own languages and completely 100% understand each other.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I can listen to Ukrainian. I don't understand Ukrainian. I have to say, I speak Russian. I can understand Russian. I have difficulties understanding Ukrainian.
George brings up a good point, and I'm glad he did. Educated Russian, educated Ukrainian, because before all this happened in 2014, I actually made many trips to Kiev. And in Kiev, people spoke Russian. Everybody spoke Russian, okay? The only time you would hear Ukrainian was on the metro system. They would have a couple of words, about getting off or something like that. And it was like, that's interesting. And it was Ukrainian, but everybody else was speaking Russian. When you go outside of Ukraine going west, it gets more and more Polish sounding.
Right, exactly.
Than Russian. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Sorry for the diversion. Go ahead.
No, that's right. So Svitolina told me that she felt extra motivation when Russians were across the net from her, but also added pressure. It's always in the back of my mind, always there, she said. But even if she didn't end up playing any Russians at Wimbledon, she didn't, there was no avoiding them this year, a point vividly demonstrated later that day. Svitolina was returning to the locker room after practice when Medvedev, and he's number 3 currently in the world, so he's a real major player. When Medvedev, a hoodie pulled over his head, came walking in the opposite direction. At first, he eyed her warily, but as they passed each other, he smiled and gave her a nod. It was an encounter that captured the awkwardness of the current moment, when even a simple acknowledgement seems noteworthy and freighted with meaning. But notice again the story. She's the one who's
freighted with meaning.
Yeah, she's hostile. She hates him. So yeah, so he looks at her warily. I mean, you know, basically they make eye contact. So he looks at her warily, smiles at her and nods. What else is he going to do? He knows that he can't shake hands with her because she's not going to shake hands with him. And then he walks out, and then the Times sort of makes it, oh, this is freighted with meaning. This is really, you know, well, by her choice. I mean, she doesn't even want to smile or not. I mean, it's evident that she didn't even acknowledge him. He acknowledged her. She didn't acknowledge him.
Eddie.
Yeah. The All England club had prohibited Russian and Belarusian players from competing at Wimbledon last year, in part because it feared that if one of them claimed the title, the result would be used for propaganda purposes back home. That's not true. They just wanted to get, be mean to the Russians. I mean, oh, used for propaganda purposes back home. I don't know what propaganda purposes.
No, everybody. Okay, let's say this Medvedev guy. I don't follow tennis. George does. Okay, let's say he won Wimbledon. He didn't last year because Russians didn't go. But let's say he won. Nobody in Russia is going to say he won because Putin's right. I mean, nobody talks like that. Nobody thinks that way. They can say just another Russian playing great tennis. The West invented the game and we've conquered it. That's what we'd probably say. Right. But they would never. It would never bleed into the political realm. I mean, I don't know anyone that would ever think something like that.
I don't see it at all. And particularly when you have sport that are so individual. It's hard to say, oh, this is a victory for Putin when it's just one individual. And particularly when it's tennis, they spent their lives abroad. I mean, they've been basically coached by Western coaches. So it's like say, oh, this is a victory for Putin. It's ridiculous and it's absolutely nonsensical. But they want to make it simple. Well, these people, these athletes are representing Putin. Again, this is how the Times is generating hatred for them, just saying, well, it was be used for propaganda purposes because they're being used by Putin.
Well, George, all we know, I mean, again, George follows this, I don't, but all I know is that these people have Russian citizenship and probably a Russian passport. What that says about their politics, I have no idea.
No, not at all. Not at all. The point is they don't want to get into politics. By and large, they just don't want to get into politics. They don't make any kind of political statements, for obvious reasons, because they know that the New York Times is there and it's going to distort everything they say. There's one point, I don't have it in any of the slides, where the Times says, we reached out to Medvedev for comment, but he never returned our call. No, of course he didn't return your call. Of course. He's not an idiot. He knows what you're trying to do. He didn't return your call. In the end, the tournament escaped a public relations debacle, thanks to a technicality. The women's championship was won by Elena Rybakina, who was born in Russia, but switched nationalities in 2018 and now plays for Kazakhstan. So again, now this is an interesting point. She's a Russian woman, born in Russia. Her parents are Russian. She has no connection whatsoever with Kazakhstan. She's not a Kazakh. There are no Kazakhs in her family. She's never lived in Kazakhstan, but she was sponsored by some Kazakh oligarch and took out a Kazakhstan citizenship And so now they say, oh, well, this player from Kazakhstan has won the tournament. I mean, it's such nonsense. And again, you know, I think it's actually quite despicable that you put such pressure on athletes, that you're actually encouraging them to switch nationalities, because otherwise they're going to be hated as Russians.
Yeah, but you know, doesn't the writer of this article just see how stupid they are with that point?
No, they don't.
They don't. No self-reflection is how goofy and stupid this is, and they've made public relations debacle. According to whom?
And then he puts, look at it, they put in parentheses, the Russian Tennis Federation claimed credit for her success anyway, referring to her as our product. Well, she's a Russian. I mean, yeah, of course I say, you know, Elena Rybakina with a Russian name, you know, she's a Russian. They're not going to say, no, well, she's a Kazakh, you know, a well-known Kazakh. She's never been to Kazakhstan. Then says Wimbledon was the only one of the 4 Grand Slam events to bar the Russians and Belarusians, and it proved to be a costly decision. The men's and women's tours stripped Wimbledon of its ranking points and fined the Lawn Tennis Association, which administers British tennis, roughly $1 million. Facing possibly even harsher sanctions this year, the All England Club and the LTA agreed to let those players come back. Snarling. In a statement, the LTA defiantly said that barring them had been, quote, the right course of action, and made clear it had been strong-armed into reversing its position. Notice the use of the word strong-armed. What the hell was the All England Club doing other than strong-arming these players, preventing them from making money? I mean, preventing them from actually making a living by competing at Wimbledon.
In a statement, the LTA defiantly said that barring them had been the right course of action. So why did you let them back? You want to lose more money? I mean, again, whoever's writing this doesn't have any reflection about how stupid it sounds. Okay,
that's right.
Yeah, we were right, but you know, but the bottom line counts the most. Okay,
well, exactly.
So, you know, I mean,
that's right. Yeah. So it was okay to deny them a means of a livelihood, so they can't make money, but it's not all right to strong arm you and deny you, you know, making money. They're going to hit you with fines. Then okay, yeah, all right, well, we'll do it because we don't want to pay these damn fines. So you have no sympathy for these, you know, individual players, you know, who aren't that rich. I mean, only the people at the very top are very rich, but tennis players aren't that rich. But you think that's okay to deny them the right to make a living? But oh my God, you're fining us, you're punishing us, we're going to lose money.
Just for clarification, George, to your knowledge, has any a Russian tennis player of repute on the international circuit said something on the court, said something during a press conference, praising the conflict, praising the death of Ukraine? To your knowledge, has anyone?
No, absolutely not. Because if that had happened, we would not hear the end of it. I mean, they'd be going on and on and on all the time. It's never happened. And says the Ukrainian players contend that the Putin regime is waging a genocidal war, and allowing the Russians and Belarusians to compete internationally amounts to a moral abdication on the part of tennis's overseers. Now, I don't know, you know, let's say that they do think that. Why do we sort of care about that? I mean, they can argue that. I mean, it's absolute nonsense because they're not waging a genocidal war. So, you know, why does this matter? You know, what they argue, because it's a ridiculous thing to say, but they waging a genocidal war.
Well, if they feel that strongly about it, then don't play tennis on the circuit. Just don't go.
That's right.
I mean,
exactly.
If you're so principled,
right?
You know, bite the bullet and say, I do not want to participate. That's a decision an individual can make.
Right. Exactly. No, absolutely right. That wars are cruel, says Marta Kostyuk, a Kiev native now ranked 37 in the world. But the way this war is, it's a different level. The Russians do not want us to exist as a nation. They want to eliminate every single one of us. So again, you know, they want to eliminate every single one.
Yeah, well, didn't the Kiev regime want to eliminate everyone in the Donbass for 8 years?
Yes, they did. And
George, they were killing their own people.
They were killing, that's right. And you know, remember the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, had said the Russians can just, if they don't like it, they can just leave Ukraine. They can just pack their bags and go. You know, in other words, from where they had lived for centuries, they can just go. You know, if they don't like the Ukrainian government.
Well, I guess they decided otherwise. They're going to stay.
That's right. In her opinion, it was, quote, sickening that tennis was permitting the Russians and Belarusians to continue to play. If they were banned, she said, it would force them to reckon with the atrocities being committed by their countries. Now, again, notice she's actually delivering hatred towards individual Russian players. And again, the Times is happy, purring when she says this. But what has any of that got to do with these individual players? I mean, you know, they're not doing anything. I mean, they're just playing tennis. I mean, these are young men and women, and all they've been doing all their lives is playing tennis. And yet she wants, they need to be banned. You know, they need to be. And then what? What? Let's say, well, it would force them to reckon with the atrocities being committed by their countries. But then what? I mean, is that going to change Russian government policy? No, of course it isn't. I mean, well, you're just going to impoverish, you know, your fellow players.
Okay, Marta, a Kiev native, now ranked 37 in the world. Well, do you have a sickening opinion that the U.S. government, excuse me, the U.S. Congress right now has a member in the House of Representatives that wants to do away with a provision in arming Ukraine that will allow the United States, the taxpayer, to fund the Azov battalion? Does that sicken you?
No.
Does that sicken you?
Right. That's right. Yeah. And then another Ukrainian, Lesia Tsurenko, expressed similar sentiments. Citing opinion polls in Russia that showed strong support for the war, Tsurenko said she now believed that most Russian players also backed it. She believed. She doesn't have any evidence that any player actually ever said anything like that to her. She believed most of the Russian players also backed it.
Why doesn't she go up and ask them?
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. You look around these people who never said anything to you, and you wonder, maybe they feel the same way. Maybe they support it. You have to assume they do. Assume?
Why?
Why assume? You know?
Why?
But so you just basically hate them. You know, they're Russians. You say, well, they're obviously the enemy. They obviously, you know.
George, what do you bet that these Russian players, they just want to be the best in the world? I think that's what they believe most.
That's what they exactly. Yeah, they're not sitting there thinking about the war. That's just, you know, that's not who they are. That's not the way they're wired. Tsurenko,
no athlete is really wired that way. Remember that crazy woman in American soccer sports or whatever.
And that's usually when the level of your play begins to go down very drastically when you preoccupy yourself with politics.
Yeah, well, the results for the American soccer women's team was deplorable.
Deplorable, okay. Exactly.
Not that I follow it.
That's right. Tsurenko said she was overwhelmed by a feeling of helplessness when war broke out, but took some comfort in the financial contribution that she and other Ukrainian players had made to the defense of their homeland.
Where does she live? Where does she live?
They don't say where she lives, so we don't know. They had all pitched in to buy a tractor for troops in southern Ukraine who were using it to dig trenches. It was a gesture of solidarity with the country's armed forces.
Well, why doesn't she go back to Ukraine and put on a uniform?
That's right. That's it. Yeah. But again, you notice this is, of course, way more political than anything the Russians did. The Russians aren't chipping in. Oh, well, let's buy a tractor to dig trenches. So again, you know, the New York Times very happy that they're actually taking part in this war. Very happy that they actually hate Russian athletes who haven't done anything, and kind of egging them on and egging on the organizers of these competitions. But you know, you really should think about banning the Russians. You know, they kind of support this war. You know, then says in July 2022, 5 months into the war, the Russian player Daria Kasatkina known to everyone as Dasha, did a series of video interviews with a Russian blogger in which he described the conflict as a nightmare and expressed sympathy for her Ukrainian peers. She also disclosed that she was gay and in a relationship with another woman, and she criticized the Russian government for discriminating against the LGBTQ community. So, again, you know, that's again,
Dasha has her right to express her opinion. Okay, just like anyone in any nationality, it's just all the same thing. Why is her beliefs elevated when you don't even consider the beliefs of others? Because you don't even ask. Okay, you just assume.
Yeah, exactly. Svitolina and Kasatkina met in the 4th round of the French Open in June. Svitolina prevailed, and though she didn't shake hands with the Russian, the two women acknowledged each other at the net, and Svitolina said later that she was really thankful for Kasatkina's opposition to the war. So even at this stage, she can't bring herself to shake hands with a Russian who's supposedly on her side. So the fact that she doesn't shake hands with a Russian, that sounds like a kind of racism towards Russia. I mean, if you're saying that Kasatkina is on your side, is sympathetic to your position, so why don't you shake hands with her?
Well, where's the scandal that where she won't shake the hand of a member of the LGBTQ community? Okay, there's a scandal right there. Scandal, okay,
yeah. My God, homophobia.
Homophobic.
In late July, it was reported that the Russian players Vera Zvonareva and Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova were denied entry to Poland and the Czech Republic, respectively, where they plan to take part in tournaments. And this is very interesting because what happened is that the Poles denied entry to this former world number 2 Vera Zvonareva from entering the country. It says this Russian tennis star was denied entry to Poland for, quote, reasons of state security and public safety. The 38-year-old was to compete at the Warsaw Open, but the former world number 2 has been blocked from entering Poland after the Interior Ministry shortlisted her for denial. They said that she's on a list of people considered undesirable in the country. However, Zvonareva has appeared to be against the conflict and had no war written on her visor when she competed at the Miami Open in March 2022. Again, first of all, you're violating all kinds of international norms by denying entry to someone just on account of her nationality. But here it's clear, again, your animus is just so that she's Russian, because it's even from that she had this no war written on her visor, that politically she'd be quite sympathetic to you. And yet even so, you're denying her entry because she's a Russian. Hey, this is Poland. You can't come in here. You're a Russian.
Well, it's interesting. It was denied entry into Poland on Friday, quote, for reasons of state security and public safety, end quote. So are we to imagine that her tennis racket has dual purpose as a Kalashnikov?
That's right. A very dangerous security risk. And then we have the other one, this Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova was denied entry to the Czech Republic. And here it says she was among the players that were deported from the Czech Republic on the eve of the upcoming Prague Open. And then the news comes after the Prague Open's decision to not have Russians and Belarusian players compete in the tournament came to light. Then it says the Women's Tennis Association has taken note of this issue and has released a statement confirming that they're looking into the matter. The statement read, despite their neutrality, the Czech authorities are denying some female tennis players the opportunity to participate in the tournament in Prague. WTA rules stipulate that all players must be allowed to participate in the WTA on the basis of merit alone without discrimination. We will continue to review the situation, taking into account the important considerations related to these complex geopolitical issues. Why are you thinking in any way about geopolitical issues, complex or simple or whatever? That has nothing to do with it. You just said you can't discriminate against players other than on merit. You know, you can ban someone playing if they're just simply not good enough. You can't ban them on the basis of their nationality. And then you say, well, we got to review the things. They'll just keep
reviewing. Why do you need to? Why does there have to be a review if it is based on merit alone?
Right.
What's the review?
Then there's nothing to review. There's nothing to review. She obviously qualified to play, and she was prevented from playing just in particular because she's Russian. There's nothing to review. So here, they've done nothing to punish the competition organizers. I mean, what they should do is say, boom, that's it. We're not going to have anything further to do with your Prague Open. That's it. No WTA members are going to take part in the Prague Open. It'd be very easy. Easiest thing in the world to punish them for doing this is, well, we're going to look into this. There's nothing to look into. You just punish them for clearly violating WTA rules.
Well, that's a cold comfort. I mean, we're looking into it. It's over. The Open's over.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, back then to the Times. I mentioned that there had been speculation about Russian players possibly seeking citizenship from other nations in order to be able to travel more easily and to escape what they perceived as the stigmatization of Russian athletes. They perceived.
Well, who's doing the stigmatization?
Exactly.
The New York Times.
That's right, exactly. But it's perceived. It's just perceived. It's not the reality. It's just perception. She didn't name names, but said it was true. Some of them are already switching. She indicated that she was leaving her options open. I don't know. Let's see, she said. Everything also depends on whether we would be allowed to compete or not. Now, so yes, just to avoid the confusion, we're talking now about the Russian player, the LGBT. We're not talking about Svitolina anymore. It's the Russian player who basically say, hey, well, why don't you switch nationalities? Then you're not going to have any of these problems. And well, all right, I'm thinking about it. But again, the Times is so lacking in awareness. How can you demand of any player that she change her nationality? It's a fundamental violation of your rights that you're forced to change nationality in order to make money, in order to be able to make a living. I mean, you can't go more violative of all the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, European Convention on Human Rights. You have to change nationalities in order to be able to make money.
Well, George, it's all part of the rules-based order.
It is. Okay? It is the rule.
You always forget that, George. Yes. This is about the rules-based order. Which really sad. This neoliberal ideology just bleeds into everything, and it wrecks everything. It poisons everything. Again, I've talked about this many, many times. They always demand a purity test. You have to be pure. Okay. Right. And you have to go by our standards here. Okay. And that is this disgusting. It poisons everything. And also what it is that they want you to lie. They want to watch you lie. Okay. And denounce your parents, denounce your friends, your religion, your community, your history, denounce it. They love that. That keeps them. That brings joy in their heart. Okay, you're absolutely right. Someone denounce their essence.
That's right. You're absolutely right. That it is denounce. Yeah, denounce your friends, denounce your colleagues, denounce your fellow athletes, in order to be accepted by us. That you have the great honor of being accepted by us. Because if you don't denounce them, life is going to be quite painful. The stigmatization, you might perceive some stigmatization, and you'll find that you just you won't be able to compete in the way you want to. And that's it. And it really is about you denounce it, and then you will purify. That's the way you purify yourself.
And you can come to our side, and you can listen to one of the acolytes of empire, Mark Milley, killing a Afghan family of 7, almost, I think almost all of them are children. Right. And you can embrace, it was a righteous kill. Okay. Right. You can embrace that. Okay.
That's right.
That's what it is. It is. That's one of the things that, a man can become a woman, they know it's absurd, But if they can convince you to believe that, then you can believe anything. Okay. Masks are good for you. Lockdowns are good for you. Children will benefit from not going to school. You start, and then it just has a ripple effect, a cascading effect.
And what's so striking when you read an article like this, we're so used to this kind of drivel that we just don't even think about it, that they never apply the same standards to themselves. I mean, the New York Times is so lacking in any self-awareness to say, has there ever been a time when anyone ever demanded this from an American athlete, that an American athlete should denounce his government's policies, that, they should have denounced the invasion of Iraq, they should have denounced George W. Bush, Bill Clinton, whoever. No one ever denounced that. So, that's of course, that would be outrageous, so we should do that. Remember, Novak Djokovic talks about how he was training. He was just a kid at the time during the bombing of Belgrade. He said, I was training underground because up above the city was being bombed by NATO. No one, cares a damn about him. He never gets any sympathy for that. Just how boring. Yeah, the guy, he was forced to train underground because his city was being bombed. But that doesn't, because we're on the side of good, and so it would be outrageous if anyone were to take measures. And again, Djokovic doesn't hate Americans because, hey, it was your country that was bombing my country. But apparently it's fine to hate Russians. That's okay. But hey, how could you bring politics into sport if you start hating Americans?
Well, that's liberal. Neoliberalism is messianic. This is a obvious outcome of this messianic ideology.
That's right. Now, this is a little bit of good news. Francesca Zambello withdraws as a jury member at Karol Szymanowski competition following a Russian music ban. So she's she held all sorts of important positions in opera. Francesca Zambello has withdrawn from the Karol Szymanowski competition due to the competition's decision to ban Russian music. In a letter to the competition, Zambello wrote, "I have just heard from Thomas Hampson about your rules for the exclusion of Russian repertory from the competition. I'm against the actions of President Putin, but I'm not against Russian history, music, or art. I'm also a recipient of the Medal for Service to Culture to Russia, presented to me by the Minister of Culture. I'm also the artistic leader of Washington National Opera, representing United States for Culture." She concluded, "Bearing these things in mind, I have to respectfully withdraw my participation. As much as I wanted to come to Poland and work with you, I hope when peace prevails, we can try again. Kind regards, Francesca." Again, imagine just saying, we're not going to play any Russian music. I mean, just saying and thinking that that's a reasonable position to take. We're not going to play Russian music. And then we have, the news comes days after the competition announced that it would be banning all Russian music. In a statement, the competition said, "Given the current sensitivities in Poland to Russian culture, and as a gesture of solidarity with the Ukrainian people, it has been decided that no works by Russian composers will be performed at the second Karol Szymanowski International Music Competition in Katowice. We are filled with sadness as we remain hopeful to the very last moment that the conflict across our border would be solved peacefully, and we would be able to continue organizing the competition without such decisions needing to be made." But why didn't you cancel the competition? I mean, which is, I think, the reasonable thing. Well, we just made that decision, but that's obviously the wrong decision. I mean, you can't have anything to do with, culture and just saying, well, we're banning, we're not going to play major contributions to culture, because then you're kind of violating the spirit of culture. I mean, you're
banning culture.
You're banning culture. Exactly. Culture is supposed to transcend, these issues of the moment. Wars and so on. That's the whole purpose of art, that it transcends these things, which only this woman apparently seemed to understand. No one else seemed to. So you know, that's the world according to the neoliberal order. You know, and again, note that they think it's perfectly reasonable to generate this kind of hatred. You know, they have no problems. The New York Times has run a number of articles about how Ukrainians are taking down this statue, that statue, Pushkin statue gone. You know, banning this Russian composer and whatever. Never once do they express any disquiet about this. I think, okay, fine, that's good. You know, this is book burning. This is what the Nazis.
I'm sorry, I was waiting for you to finish. I was going to say the book burning. Exactly. You know, with a parting thought on this topic, as a Russian friend of mine who was a dissident in the Soviet Union, moved to the United States, and the Soviet Union came to an end. His love of Russia was so great that he moved back. Okay, and now he's a dissident here, which is really weird because he's an American citizen. And he pointed out to me, and I think it's so smart. He said, you know, when I lived in America during the Cold War, he met Ronald Reagan. It's one of his favorite, artifacts. He loves to show a picture of meeting with Reagan in the Oval Office. He said, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the Wall Street Journal never had a bad word for the Soviet Union, and has never had a good word for Russia.
That's right.
There's a lot of truth to that.
Absolutely.
All right. I applaud you, George, for putting that together. That was a lot of work, collating all of that.
It's a lot of work getting through any New York Times article, I'll tell you. That's the work part.
That's right. George reads the New York Times, so we don't have to.
That's
okay.
Right.
All right, everybody. This is Peter and George. We're the Gaggle. We're on Locals. So please go to thegaggle.locals.com. This is Friday. That means the drought starts now.
It's very, very bleak. So fall is coming. So everything is already very grim. But to add to the grimness, I'm gonna have to wait a few days for my next installment of the live stream. But if you can get through this weekend, it's the Labor Day weekend if you're living in the United States. Then Tuesday, 3 p.m. Eastern time, please come with comments, criticisms, suggestions. Everything is welcome. On the way out the door, think about little buddy. He managed to join us. Didn't want to, but he managed to join us. And, he says, yeah, I mean, he says, I don't like anyone being banned, particularly, if it means they can't put money into my tip jar. So if you want, Buddy to be in a better mood, whip out, a few bob from your pocket, dunk him in his tip jar. Might put him in a better mood. He's not in a good mood these days. So remember, if you like the Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.